Hello and welcome to Better Utah Broadcast. My name is Katie Matheson. I'm the Communications Director here with Alliance for a Better Utah. And today we have our communications intern, Kyle. Say hi, Kyle.
Hi, Kyle.
You're fired. Dad jokes. All right, and we also have Luis Garza from Comunidades Unidas. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Quickly, before we get started, next week, 12:30 on Wednesday, we will be speaking with Moms Demand Action, talking about the walkouts that are happening today, or that did happen today, the March for Our Lives that is happening next week. So Moms Demand Action is kind of an anti-gun violence organization here in, actually it's national, but they also have a chapter here in Utah. Be sure to click get reminders so that you can get reminders when we go live. So Luis, can you give us a little bit of your background? Like, where are you from? What is your story, and why are you involved with Comunidades Unidas?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm originally from Mexico, so I'm an immigrant here in Utah. I moved here when I was 16, so it's been now almost 16 years. And I've been involved with the organization for 10 of those years. And so I really was attracted to the organization Comunidades Unidas, or Communities United, because of our mission that is focused on empowering our Latino and Latinx immigrant community here in the state to advocate for change, change that we care about, whether it's, related to immigration, related to healthcare, different issues that our community faces. And that's really what attracted me to the organization, and really gets me excited to be coming to work every single day to make sure that we are raising the voices of our immigrant community here in Utah, because it continues to grow and it's a growing population, but many times our voices are not included in the debate. And that's really what our organization and my passion is about, to really make sure that all of those voices are included.
Wow. So what is your, what is your education? What is your background in, how did you fall into this, basically, is my question.
So I went to the University of Utah. I did an undergrad in economics and international studies, and then a master's in public administration. So I was always interested kind of in different, social, international issues, and migration was one of the things that attracted me the most. Because as an immigrant here, I moved here when I was 16, like I mentioned, so it was pretty difficult to integrate, kind of find the ways into navigation of the different systems here. And I faced different barriers, related to healthcare and related to different aspects of my life, that I felt like it was important for people in the immigrant community to know the resources, that many times people just don't know. And that's what attracted me first to CU, because of the different work that we do in the community of informing community members about their rights, about their resources. And then most exciting, I think the organization was founded in 1999 by a group of Latina women. And it's a very grassroots effort that started back in 99. And we always try to stay connected with the community that we work with. We see ourselves as building bridges, and organizing our community to advocate for change, not really, providing a solution to all of our problems, because we don't have that, but it's really more about organizing people and making sure that our voices are heard again.
That's great. That's great. So if you don't mind me quickly just asking, what kind of barriers did you face when you had to, so you mentioned barriers and what you had to go through to kind of integrate here. What kind of barriers were there? And can you kind of just explain those more? So you mentioned healthcare and maybe schooling, stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. So number one is, the language barrier, cultural barriers, that people face when they migrate. And those were definitely challenging, moving here I moved to Bountiful in Utah, and it was a pretty homogeneous community in the school back then. And so that's always a challenge, for people to integrate. When you don't see people like you, or when you don't meet people that are like you, it's many times challenging to find ways, to integrate into the school system, for example. But then I think something that we always see with our community is the different, the lack of understanding in terms of the system. Like I mentioned, healthcare or education or the legal system, that a lot of families, and me personally too, is very different from the countries that we come from. And so is really about the educational piece and making sure that people know how to navigate those. That I think it was the most challenging for me. I remember back in when I was in high school, I needed to go to a doctor and I didn't know how it worked, at all.
Yeah.
And so it was completely different from other countries that have more of a, socialized medicine where you have more access in some areas, but then difficulties in many other areas. But I think it's just that lack of understanding that it's many times it kind of makes those barriers more difficult. So that's what we try to do as an organization, to eliminate those barriers and inform the community about those resources.
That's remarkable. Wow. Can you tell us about just a little bit more about CU, Comunidades Unidas? You said it was a group of Latina women in the 90s, and you said 99, is that right? Yeah. And what was the impetus for them creating this organization? It was just to gather people from this community together?
So it was a really exciting history that the group of women that started the organization, they were going door to door in the city of Midville to inform community members, especially immigrants, about infant mortality rates, which they were pretty high during that time.
Wow.
So they were informing people, especially women, to take folic acid, prenatal health information, all those things. And when they started going door to door, they realized that families were facing a lot more issues than just infant mortality. And so it was related to civil rights abuses, to educational challenges, like I mentioned, to healthcare. And that's really where they said, we actually need to bring people together and talk about these issues and find a way to address them. And so for a while, the initiative was part of the city of Midville. So it was part of a city initiative. But then it kind of grew too much and it started getting a little political. And then they said, no, we need to form our own organization. And that's when CU was born, Comunidades Unidas was born. And so I think it's, we continue to be very involved with our community, and our main focus is healthy families and united families, especially right now with everything happening with immigration. Our focus is to keep families together and keep families healthy.
Yeah, and that's like a very Utah thing, right?
Very much, yeah. And that's a good segue, too. I think next we wanted to chat a little bit about DACA, which I believe is expired last week. Is that my understanding? Is that correct?
So the official deadline was it was March 5th. But there basically nothing has happened with DACA. That you probably heard that the federal court allowed the renewals of DACA to continue. So people that had DACA in the past, they can still renew it if it's expiring this year or in the near future. But new applications are not being accepted. And so that deadline was kind of more symbolic for Congress to act. Right. But what we saw is that Congress did absolutely nothing. And many of our youth are still in limbo. They're still, anytime the courts can decide that the program that needs to stop.
So it's basically people that are already in the DACA system, they can renew, but people that have not signed up for it or are basically in limbo, and that's affecting, sounds like younger Latinx individuals, correct?
All immigrant communities. And so this program was created by the Obama administration in 2012, and it was basically for children who were brought to the United States as under the age of 16,
right.
And the requirement was for them to be in the country by 2007, and so that does not apply for new immigrants after 2007, but still people that are turning 16 that could potentially benefit from the program, but now that it's been blocked, they cannot apply anymore.
So what's the implications of that? How is that impacting people? I mean, obviously we can see there's uncertainty about their future. How does that impact their daily lives, though?
A lot, since the announcement was made at the end of last year by the Attorney General, we keep seeing there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, and just concerns in terms of the future of our youth. Because we had with DACA, people were able to get a work permit, to get protection from deportation, and many youth. They had really good jobs in nursing and as teachers, as you name it, and now they're being told when your permit expires, then you might not be able to renew it, and so that really puts a lot of pressure on families, as you can imagine, and on youth. When you are going through college and you have to worry about your not being able to work, or you have to worry about the future of your own education. It's like how much can you focus on school?
Right.
And that's really such a shame for especially for I believe a congressional delegation, because like you mentioned, the family is such a big Utah value, and when we're talking about families, like this is really affecting the core of our family, which is our youth. So it's really unfortunate what's happening right now.
How many DACA beneficiaries do we have in Utah right now? Do you know?
It's 10,500.
So 10,500. And so these beneficiaries, even if they are eligible to renew their DACA, status, I guess. Is there, how much certainty does having DACA status, I guess, give someone versus somebody who is not able to apply now for DACA status? Is there a difference in is it like I'm safe from being, from something happening to me now for the next, I don't know, how is it, 5 years or something?
It's a 2-year permit.
So it's a 2 year. So for 2 years, they feel safe, right? And then they have to go through the process of renewal. I would imagine that, and I have no idea, but I would imagine that there would still be a level of uncertainty given kind of the back and forth. I mean, Congress has been debating this issue, since like the early 2000s, and that's why Obama started DACA, was because Congress just wasn't able to do anything. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I imagine that seeing a Congress that, what has it been, it's almost 20 years now, still can't come to a conclusion on this specific issue, I would be nervous, like every 2 years, like what is going to happen to me now, like my education, am I going to be able to continue my education, stuff like that. Is that accurate?
Definitely. So that, like you mentioned, this was started in the early 2000s, and our very own Senator Orrin Hatch was one of the original proponents of the DREAM Act back in 2002. And so this has been the DREAM Act is a piece of legislation that would allow basically the DACA program to become permanent, for people to apply for permanent resident status and eventually to citizenship. And so because the DACA program was created by the Obama administration and it was not really a law. So like you mentioned, every 2 years people had to renew, and people were still in limbo to a big extent. And so the DREAM Act will really allow this to become law. And we had support from both parties since the early 2000s, but then Congress just doesn't seem to get their act together in terms of passing a permanent solution to this issue.
And what goes into becoming to getting DACA status? My understanding is that you give a whole lot of personal information to the government. Is that correct?
Yes, and so that's why back in 2012, when it was first passed, a lot of people were hesitant. I'm providing all this information about myself to the government when there's no guarantee that I'll be protected after 2 years. It's definitely a risk, because it's such a, they ask about, where you were born, address, phone number, school. They ask for transcripts. They ask for no criminal record. They run your fingerprints. I mean, talking about extreme vetting, I don't know how much extreme it can get than that, because it's really a very long process, and people are waiting up to 6 months or more to just get their process through the government system. And so it's very difficult for people to decide, and especially right now even for the renewals, for people to say, yes, I wanted to renew when all of this is happening, but people are going through a lot of uncertainty and just fear to do it again.
And I think as the decision plays out longer and longer and keeps getting pushed out further and further, I mean, I would imagine the Latinx community has less and less confidence in giving their information to them, and the carrot keeps dangling in front of them. I mean, eventually, what's their recourse? Are they going to keep having confidence that the government will eventually do something, or what else can we possibly do?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the big question. That a lot of we saw a lot of support from both parties. When the current administration decided to end DACA. But then things, kind of start cooling off, and that's very unfortunate. And especially after the deadline passed on March 5th last week, now we keep hearing that they're not going to even touch the issue until after the midterm election. And so that's, how much more is that until November? That it's, that is 9 months more that people are just going to continue, and then we get the new Congress in place, and then how long it's going to take for them to take it over. And so, I agree. It's been 20 years, and it doesn't seem like it's going to end soon, unfortunately.
You could gestate a baby in that amount of time. That's a long time to wait. All right, not to make light of that situation. 9 months, that's where my brain goes. I have 2 babies. All right, so let's kind of move on, what is, I assume you guys work with both documented and undocumented immigrants. What is the daily kind of life of an undocumented immigrant in Utah? I know this could be a wide range, so I'm asking you to just like narrow it down for us, but what exactly, things that maybe we may not even think about being problematic, is that something, are there things that are problematic for undocumented immigrants in Utah?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first I want to say I'm not undocumented myself, so I haven't lived that experience, so I definitely want to point that out, because the experiences are so vast and so different from different community members, and I will never compare my immigrant experience to somebody who's undocumented. But I think what we definitely seen is a lot of, what I mentioned, fear and uncertainty, that, families, immigrant families care about the same things as, native-born communities here. We care about families, we care about schools, we care about healthcare, about all of those things. But
human
I think,
things, yeah.
Yeah, human things that we all worry about. But then in addition to that, it's all those barriers that come with the immigration status, and we saw it with the DACA youth, that many of them didn't even realize that they were undocumented until they had to apply for their first job at the age of 16, because there's really nothing else that you need your social security for until you're at that age. Or when people are applying, for their first job, or they're applying for a scholarship, or they're trying to get FAFSA, and then they realize you don't qualify. Right. So I think immigrant families, especially undocumented immigrant families, they go through a lot of different issues. And they don't qualify for public benefits, for example, and we see a lot of rhetoric, especially from conservative groups, of saying, all these families are, absorbing the system of public benefits when they don't even qualify. The people who don't have documents, they can't get food stamps, for example, they can't get Medicaid, they can't get any of those benefits, and so that really puts pressure on low-income families, because they don't have that safety net. So they have to support one another, they support their neighbors and family members, and it just puts a big burden on families that gets reflected on the children's education, on healthcare, and all of those things. That is just a spiral effect. Exactly.
Yeah. So what are the needs of, again, this is a broad question, but what are the needs of the immigrant community, at least that you see kind of on a day-to-day basis, like things that we may not consider?
We definitely see a lot of, like I mentioned, our organization focused on access to healthcare. We see a lot of issues related to navigating the healthcare system. How do I find health insurance? How do I find a regular place for healthcare, or even preventive health efforts? And so we see a lot of that, and we try to help people navigate through that. So we help people get connected with a primary care physician. We have we partner with a mobile health unit that comes into our office, and they provide checkups. And so a lot of basic needs that we feel like it's very important for our communities to address in order for them to be more stable, and then they can move on to being more involved civically, or being more active in different issues. But if people don't have their basic needs covered, then it's very difficult for anybody to do that. So that's a lot of what we try to focus on in terms of covering those basic needs. And so it's mostly access to healthcare. We also provide immigration services. And so for people that want to apply for DACA or renew DACA right now, or citizenship, that's something that we help people through that process. And then also financial education. That is so important for all of us to start saving, to start, making sure that our finances are in track so we can plan for the future. And so we have a lot of programs related to those aspects that help an immigrant family be more stable, and then find a way to be more successful.
And maybe a lot of that's a component of this next question. We talked a lot about family well-being, and that's something you guys are a big proponent for. And I think Utahns would agree there also are as well. So how do you guys work towards that goal? Like I said, a lot of the things that you just mentioned are probably part of it, but what are the needs of an immigrant family, and how does that differ from maybe a non-immigrant family?
I think, like I mentioned, is very, very similar. The big difference is kind of that help of navigating the systems.
Right.
And so what we do is we have our staff is bilingual. They understand the culture. The majority of us are immigrants ourselves, and so that really helps for people to feel more at ease that we can help them navigate the process. But then something that, as I mentioned, our organization is I think, very unique in a sense that we don't feel like we are giving handouts or we're providing just a social service, but that we are empowering people to understand the system and navigate it themselves. That they know how to advocate for their own families, and that they feel more comfortable saying, this is not right what's happening in terms of my children's education or in terms of my health care, and that we encourage families to be more active and more vocal about those issues. And so we are involved in many of public schools, and we encourage parents to be involved in PTAs and community councils and different areas where our community voices needs to be heard.
That's awesome. And then I'm going to ask you one last question. How can we in the broader Utah, the white community, kind of like, or non-immigrant or immigrants from hundreds of years ago, help the immigrant community? Like, what can we do to support your mission at Comunidades Unidas and then the larger immigrant community in Utah?
Well, I think it's very important to raise our voices, collectively, that when we are reaching out to our congressional delegation, for example, that we mention things like the DREAM Act. We mention things like what's happening with the immigrant community being in limbo, because I really don't think that this is just an immigrant issue. This is everyone's issue, because it's let's say everyone in the immigrant community gets deported, that will affect our state's economy, that will affect our education, our jobs, and so I think it's important for different angles and different perspectives to be included in these voices. And so I will encourage everyone to reach out to our representatives locally at the national level, and make sure that these issues continue to be at the forefront. And the other thing will be to reach out to somebody that is different from you. That I think is always helpful, because sometimes when we are only watching the news, we only hear one perspective. But it's not until you hear a personal story and you get a personal connection with somebody that you are able to build bridges and really truly become an ally of somebody that has a completely different experience. So I think that's always very beneficial. And then we have traditional and donating, that it's always helpful as well.
Yeah, so that's a great segue. How do people get in contact with you? How do they volunteer, donate, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so people can visit our website, and it's www.cuutah.org, or we're on social media at Comunidades Unidas.
Cool. Great. And as always, you guys, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Better Utah. Subscribe to our emails to get updates. Join us at 12:30 next week again for a conversation with Kyle and Moms Demand Action. And click Remind Me to get reminders when we go live. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.